Hi, I'm Jessica, and when I'm not drinking all the coffee, watching Razorback sports, or hanging out with my family of boys, it's my passion to help elementary music teachers just like you find your unique teaching style. My goal with this podcast is to share helpful tips, strategies, and to give you the motivation you need to gain momentum in your teaching so you can continue being the music teacher rock star you already are. Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about Black History Month and what to do in the music room. So there are several activities you can do in the music room for Black History Month. Of course, you can do singing and all things music, but we're going to talk about specifics today. Before I forget, I want to mention the upcoming live webinar, that free webinar that is coming up that you can sign up for by just heading to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. And it's for any elementary music teacher that wants training about how to be successful teaching elementary music. So you can go check that out. All right. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about teaching music in your classroom for Black History Month. And so the first thing I want to tell you that you can do is celebrate famous Black musicians. So what that means is there's several ways you can do this. You can make a bulletin board. You maybe already have a bulletin board up of composers, or maybe you're doing a composer of the month, or you may just be doing composer activities every once in a while. But maybe during Black History Month, you have a celebration of composers on your bulletin board, and you put up pictures of different Black musicians, which I'm going to talk about today. And you can talk about them during your class time and maybe highlight one every single time you see that class. You might only see those students once a week, so you can talk about a different musician every time you see them. So I'm just going to mention a few of these artists that have been inspirational in my life, and the list is extensive. You can pick anyone, but Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Stevie Wonder, and then even modern artists like Beyonce. It's because I feel like meeting kids where they're at sometimes and being interested in music they're interested in is important too, to incorporate some kind of popular music. So activities you can do. The bulletin board, like I said, listen to their music. One of my favorite activities to do with students is to let them hear a piece of music, and maybe they're not familiar with it like you are, because the music that you're used to, it's like an oldie to them, right? So just simply giving your students a piece of paper and even a crayon. If you're the music teacher, you may not have enough crayons for everybody to have more than one, or you can even hand out a pencil, and you basically just tell them. For the older students, you could it could be a writing assignment, but basically you just have them write or color what the music makes them feel like. Think about what the words mean to them, or you could even have them, before you talk about it as a class, talk about what song they're hearing. Why does it sound the way it is? What style of music is it? Anything along those lines. And so if you don't want to do that, then you could just have a conversation as a class. You listen to the music, then you talk about the style of music it is, then you talk about who this person is. Just like with other composers, you're probably talking about where they came from, what instrument they played, if they sang, like Beethoven had to overcome adversity. So things like that. And so the same goes with teaching about the composers in Black History Month. You talk about, when you're talking about adversity they had to overcome, back in the day, it was not the same as it is in our culture now. And so talk about how these artists overcame adversity. What made them want to be a musician or a performer? Was there a music teacher that inspired them? How did they become a musician? Then you can go into the song that they heard and then talk about other music that inspired them, what made them want to write the songs they wrote. You can have a whole discussion about it. Now, of course, this depends on the age of the students you're talking to, right? You can have more in-depth conversations with your older students than you can the younger ones. But so that's the first activity, is just doing things centered around musicians or composers, whether it's from today, keep it clean, because there's a lot of modern artists that, you can't play their music in school, or musicians that, you really need to talk about musicians that are like our founding fathers of music, pretty much. So to tie on to that, what I was going to say next is then you can read books about the musicians. One of my favorite things to do in music, and I feel like I've mentioned it several times, is to read books in the music classroom. Reading is important no matter what subject it is. And I've talked before about reading books that aren't necessarily just about music, but you can make them musical, like the kids have to move. You know, if the book says skip or jump or run or hop, then they do those motions, but they also can move to different words you give them, so they have to work on listening activities. Like, for instance, you have to move when you hear the word and, you move when you hear the word fish, you move, I'm just throwing out words. So those activities. When you're reading books for Black History Month, you're reading about the musicians we just talked about, but also in January is Martin Luther King Day. So you could read a book about him, and there are several songs about Martin Luther King as well. So you could have a whole lesson about Martin Luther King where you're reading a book and then you're singing a song about him as well. And then you can make a book musical. Like if it's a book about, Duke Ellington, then we all know the famous song he wrote, right? You can feel it all over, that one. So you can read a book about Duke Ellington, listen to the music, and they can pretend like they're playing trumpet while they're listening to him. The kids can feel the music, and it's an amazing movement activity because you can talk to them about moving in their own bubble, and they have to move high, low, wide, and their trumpet has to play high in the air and then low, and then try to play the rhythm in the air to the song they're hearing. And you can also do steady beat activities with that as well. I just recently shared, and I'm going to include the link in the show notes, to a Facebook Live I just did about one of my favorite songs to teach in Black History Month called Lift Every Voice and Sing. You may or may not know about me. I've shared several times how I started teaching music at a low-income school. It was in the inner city, and about 90% of the demographic at my school were African American students. And so we did not just do we did songs from everywhere, just like you would in any school. But what I was going to say is when it came time for Black History Month, it was very important to my students and their families and the other teachers and my principal and everybody at that school that we celebrate it. And one of my favorite songs is called Lift Every Voice and Sing. And if you want to hear what it sounds like, you can go hear my lovely singing voice in the Facebook Live. But anyways, so this ties into, after you teach them that song, it's a spiritual. Then, so you can teach about the different styles of music that's relevant to Black History Month. Spirituals, jazz, blues, even hip hop, and any other music that's influenced by the African American culture. You can explain what those styles are. You've probably talked about those styles in your classroom already. And so you can explain what they are, how these styles are similar or different from each other. Music they can listen to, and then maybe play a song and ask them, what kind of style of music is that? Why do you think this artist wrote this blues song? What was he so sad about? And explain what the blues is, talk about jazz and how they have to improvise, just like you do with your students in your classroom. They improvise. So you can tie talking about different styles of music into teaching lessons about things you're already doing in your classroom, if that makes sense. So the next thing I want to talk about, when it comes to, Black History Month is you might be asked to do a program. And so I'm going to be talking more about programs later. But right now I want to talk about how to put on a Black History program. There are several programs out there, but one thing I really like to do is find programs and then pull from other resources I have available to me, and then add music that's already available to me with the program, and then make it its own. And one thing I want to mention about if you do a program like, for Black History Month, probably unless there's a couple ways you can do this. One way is you maybe do a whole program about Martin Luther King. And if you do, a lot of the songs are going to be very powerful in their meaning already. And so you don't need to focus so much on adding a lot to it, really, like adding a lot of movement or instruments, because it's mainly going to be a kind of a somber program. All programs do not need to look the same, okay? So it's probably going to be a more somber program where the kids are just focused on singing and probably doing some motions and have some speaking parts. But the other thing you could do for a program is, like I mentioned earlier, all the different styles of music. You could do, some fast jazzy songs and then maybe even blues. You could do even have the kids sing a hip hop song. And I'm going to link in the show notes also to how to have your students write raps. And so you may not have seen that blog post before, but you could do a whole program centered around styles of music as well. Or you could do a program, like I mentioned, about different artists and then, just highlight one of their songs and have someone read about them. Do a speaking part about them. And then, there's a whole lot of different ways you can do it. Be creative in your program planning, which is not the point of this podcast today, but it doesn't have to just be straight from a program book. You can make it your own. You know your students better than anyone, and you know what you would like to do with them in your classroom. So go ahead and do that, right? So I wanted to say, make sure you check out the couple of things I'm going to have linked in the show notes. And so you can go and read those on your own and check out that Facebook Live. And I would love if you listen to this podcast, go ahead and tag me on Instagram at Jessica Peresta. And I'd love to see who's listening to this podcast. And also you can share it on Facebook as well. I would love for you to have an amazing week and keep teaching your students music every single day, even if you're exhausted, even if you don't feel like being there, even if you're still not ready to be back to school after winter break. Keep teaching your students music. They love having you as their teacher, and you're doing an amazing job. All right, you guys, I will talk to you soon. Have an amazing week. Bye. Thank you so much for listening in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, I would love for you to review the show and leave a rating on iTunes. To find out more about how I can help you gain momentum in your elementary music teaching career, head to thedomesticmusician.com, where you'll find free downloads, courses, the blog, and so much more. Continue teaching music and never doubt the impact you're making each and every day in the lives of your students.